I am yours, I am yours, I am yours. Send me, Lord, I am yours.
Welcome to the Gospel Centered Pro-Life Podcast. In this episode, we're going to do an interview with Tim and Terri Palmquist, pro-life pioneers who've been in this battle for a long time, and we're going to talk to them about how they got involved. Stick with us.
Lord, I felt your passion, I've touched your heart.
All right, well, welcome to the Gospel Centered Pro-Life Podcast. Appreciate all those who join. I have with me today here Tim and Terri Palmquist, all right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And these guys, I just met them actually just an hour and a half or so ago. You had reached out to me via email a couple of days ago, and you guys were going to be in town. And I thought, hey, man, I got these pro-life pioneers in town here in Charlotte, and really wanted to take the opportunity to get you guys to share your story, share where the Lord has kind of brought you guys from and where he's bringing you to, share just, I'm going to get into some of the pro-life history stuff. Mm-hmm. This podcast is focused on bringing the gospel and talking about the necessity of the gospel when we're talking about the issue of abortion. And I know that's you guys' heart, and just a little bit that I've heard from you, Tim, especially, is just your heart, of course, is to save babies, but also to proclaim the gospel. Share real quick just a little bit about you guys, maybe how long you've been in pro-life ministry and what kind of ministry you've been involved in and that sort of thing, if you don't mind.
Right. Well, we started in pro-life ministry about 1986. Our first child was born. We married in 85 and got pregnant on our honeymoon, and so our first child was born.
That's really pro-life right there.
Didn't intend it that way,
Sure.
but God did.
Yeah.
So we were the typical. We'll have 2 or 3 kids. Type of thing. But,
in a couple of years.
Yeah, sure.
And so we had our first child, and he was in the hospital for 10 days afterwards, and just got to see a lot of struggling children there in the hospital with our son. And there was another baby that we got to know that was born at 22 weeks, I think, was little baby Caleb, born at 22 weeks, that also touched us before we were married. I had a radio program, and she was handling my calls, and this lady called us saying that her son was born, and his life was just hanging in the balance. And so I ended up going to this children's hospital, seeing this little baby that's the size of my hand.
Yeah.
It really frustrated her because she was going, how in the world can people abort a baby the size of my son?
Yeah.
It just really touched her, and we became really good friends.
Yeah.
Right. But, I grew up in a family. My dad was in Christian radio and very, very Christian, conservative Christian family.
Yeah.
But, my memories in 1973, I was 12 years old, and yet my memories of the church Christians reacting to the Roe versus Wade decision are non-existent. Mm-hmm. I have tons of memories of my dad and other people, other people I knew being outraged over various aspects of what was going on with Nixon.
Yeah.
I remember those things happening. I remember the day Nixon left on that helicopter. I remember that quite well, but I remember nothing of anybody speaking out about abortion.
Yeah.
And so, it was years later that a kind of a long-haired young man who was part of the Calvary Chapel movement had a radio program on my dad's station, and he started playing this song from a guy, Gary S. Paxton.
Okay.
Old song, first song I ever heard that dealt with this. It's kind of interesting to call it a song, but it's called "The Big A Equals the Big M."
Okay.
Hear the little heartbeat, it would go. And so I heard this song that ends with a flat line of you have a baby's heartbeat throughout the song, and at the end it just flatlines.
Yeah.
It says, "My creation, you killed it."
Yeah.
And then it just goes.
Wow.
So, we weren't hearing about it in church, and we weren't hearing about it much at home. But, from this thing we heard on the radio, and the people calling into my radio show, and we had a young woman who called us from a community, told us she was pregnant, and we tried to figure out how to help her. Didn't know what to do because she was saying she was going to abort her baby. She just wanted prayer, and turned out, long and the short of it, that she was lying about the whole thing. And she was just doing it to get attention. But God used that to get us thinking towards what are we going to do about this situation.
Yeah. A lot of Christians sort of, I was a believer for a couple of years until before the Lord got a hold of me over the issue of abortion. Like, we believe abortion's bad because it's killing a child and it's bad, but is there really anything we can do about it? Is there really anything that I'm called to do about it? I mean, we're called just to preach the gospel, right? We're not called to go out and deal with political issues. And it's because we're duped by the devil, I believe, as a church, into believing, and the church has been for a long time, into believing that abortion is a political issue. And it's really not. It's really not a political issue at all. So talk a little bit about how the Lord got you involved in pro-life work. I know you guys were involved in the rescue movement and stuff like that. So talk a little bit about your heart, as far as God's heart in your heart, and getting you involved in that extreme level of pro-life involvement that some people think it is.
Well, we knew before we were married. One of the things that kind of brought us together, we knew each other about 7 years before we were married, but we had been together in high school, and then when I went off to college, I decided to leave her behind and go try out some other relationships with girls.
I was
and
still
things.
in high school too.
Oh, yeah.
So
She was 2 years younger than me, so you can't go to college and have a high school girl as your girlfriend.
It's not cool, right?
So anyway, eventually I come back to her, as she knew I would always come back to her. So, now I forgot what I was going to say.
Just getting involved in the rescue movement and that sort of thing.
Right. Well, this was early 80s I'm talking about, but
when we wanted to talk about getting married, he had basically at some point decided he didn't even think he needed to get married. He didn't want it. He just wanted to serve God.
Okay.
That's the point I was going to say. And the thing that she kind of hooked me back in with was, we can serve God better together than we can separately.
She's wise.
And so we got married planning to serve God, and we had already had, a few little influences toward doing something about abortion. But I was still just thinking of inner city ministry. I wanted to move to Jackson, Mississippi, be a part of ministering to people in the inner city, because there was a ministry there we were familiar with. And, so when you get pregnant on your honeymoon, it kind of changes your perspective on things. And so she's
changes
thinking,
your ministry focus too.
Are we going to move to Jackson, Mississippi, with the being pregnant and all that? And her mom's health wasn't good and things. So she's thinking, is there something we can do around here? What can we do around here that's going to make a difference? And so we heard about it, a pregnancy center, about 30 minutes from us. We were in a little town called Delano, California, and so we had to go down to Bakersfield to be a part of this pregnancy center. And
we got trained.
We got trained, but we couldn't finish the training because she had a breast infection and baby had to be in the hospital or different things like that. And
we never could finish it.
Never could finish the training. And so she finally says, kind of out of frustration, what I really would like to do is talk to girls who are actually going in for abortion. Does anybody do that? And they said, yeah, there actually is a group that does that. And it turned out the group that went out on the sidewalk had started a couple of years before that, and the pregnancy center had been founded by some of the same people there, and so they were familiar with what they did there. So we went out on the sidewalk and got to know these people that were ministering to girls going in. And, honestly, for about the first 6 months, we are standing there. We want to be there. We want to be used. We want to be effective. But I personally am standing there thinking, how do you talk to these people? How do you find the words to say to a girl who's about to go in and have her baby killed? And so we're kind of standing in awe of these people who are talking to the girls going in and praying and just thinking, wow, these are like spiritual giants. They're letting us stand next to them. And eventually a woman comes in the first one that I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this is the first one that
I was pretty much there by myself.
you
too.
really had an impact on. Is this woman who comes in, she has a little baby.
And she doesn't speak English.
Okay.
Little baby, she has to do something with this baby, very sick
Hooked
baby.
up to oxygen.
She has to do
and-
something on it with a tube and cleaning out the baby's throat or something, and she doesn't speak a word of English.
Yeah.
Terry didn't speak a word of Spanish, and yet this woman is going in.
Into the abortion center?
And
yeah.
she brought her baby
and
with
he
her.
brought her little sickly baby with her.
Because she had to have her, and so then I somehow, with God's guidance,
Yeah.
was able to convince her to get in, because she had taken the bus,
Mm-hmm.
get into my car, and I drove her across town to the pregnancy center.
Yeah.
And they found someone that spoke Spanish, and she ended up keeping her baby.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So that was, and even then, even after that, it's still, well, okay, Terry is there, and I'm just kind of there to support her because, as a man, I felt like, what do I
Yeah.
have to say to these?
Man, that's one of the things that we found out. You were just out on the sidewalk earlier with us, and you noticed there were two men out there. Well, actually 3, 4. I guess I would include myself as a man. So there are like 4 of us guys out there, and I get some of that from men who come out and they have a burden for this thing, and they want to do something about abortion. We're like, this was a woman's issue, but the fact is, this is really a man's issue. And if we could reach that young man that's brought his girlfriend for an abortion, we can also influence him to influence her. Is pretty powerful. And some of our most effective sidewalk counselors are actually men.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I mean, the devil lies to us. We kind of allow ourselves to be confused by some of the world's understanding of stuff. But this is really a man's issue too. So it's good to see, from my perspective, a couple serving the Lord together in that capacity and seeing the necessity for, husband and wife to be serving and the way you can sort of tag team this thing.
Right.
It's pretty cool. And
Well,
you guys have been doing that for a long time, right?
Right. About 15 to 20 years after we started, Terry was leading a group in a vacation Bible school at our church, Baptist church that we went to there in Bakersfield, and this little boy was part of her group, and he prayed to accept Christ there in her group. And later we learned that his father, the little boy's father, said that I was there when they went in to abort the baby.
Wow.
And that I was there telling him that you need to be a real man. You need
Yeah.
to stand up for your baby. And I, at that time, I don't know if that was the first one I heard of that I had made the difference in. But honestly, for many, many years there, I was there ministering with Terry, and I was mainly supporting her. I would talk from time to time, but I just felt like she's a lot more effective than I am. I want them to hear the most effective voice. And sometimes, if I'm the only one there, then I got to be the one that talks. But I didn't want to always be the one talking because I felt like she's just so much more effective than I was. But this guy told me that I was there.
Yeah,
to
isn't it
save-
amazing how the
and
Lord lets us?
this
I mean,
baby
what are the chances?
encouraging.
In just random chance of events? No way. That was God in His providence, sort of letting you hear
Right.
that
And this-
you were effective in that.
And that this child whose life was physically saved, that God used me to physically save his life, and then Terry was there to pray with this child to accept Christ.
That's
in Vacation
amazing.
Bible
That is
School.
amazing.
That
There's no
was-
such thing as accidents. There's no such thing as just fate or whatever. This is the providence of God moving. That's powerful. So if you could talk a little bit about, because I'm interested in, I told you I'm interested in sort of the pro-life movement history, and I've had Flip on, and I'm going to have him on again hopefully pretty soon, talking about the rescue movement, him being the president of that or the director of Operation Rescue for a while.
Right.
But you guys were involved in that movement. Were you involved when it first got started, or you sort of jumped on board with that after
Pretty
it?
much. We Randall Terry had come to Bakersfield, right? Or our church.
We were involved when it first started in California, but I
Yeah.
believe it was in Atlanta and then New Jersey, probably a year or so before it came to California.
Yeah. Some folks might not even have a clue when I'm talking about rescue movement or whatever. Describe a little bit of what that means. What does it mean when people say Operation Rescue, rescue movement, and that sort of thing?
When we heard about them doing the Holy Week rescues,
Okay.
if you remember, back, what year was
It'd be
that?
1989, I think.
Okay.
Because even sidewalk counseling, believe it or not, I was kind of shy to do it.
Yeah.
And when we went down to LA, in Bakersfield, it's more conservative, and we don't have the pro-aborts in our face or anything like that. But when we were down there, I was just going to sidewalk counsel. I wasn't going to risk arrest. And what they do is they would actually place themselves in front of the doors and not allow anyone to go in because they didn't want babies to be killed. And we were taught that we needed to be peaceful and respectful and pray. And it was an awesome time, but I was just counseling.
Yeah.
And so I was able to try to talk to girls, but the pro-aborts had those big keep abortion legal signs.
Okay.
And they would surround the girl, and there's no way you could. So I had to raise my voice.
Yeah.
And I came out of my comfort zone and yelled, "Please let us talk to you." And they had surrounded this girl in a car and didn't want her to look at us or anything. But pretty soon the driver backs up and she ended up leaving.
Yeah.
And so that encouraged me and made me more vocal when I came back to Bakersfield.
Yeah. Yeah. So the rescue movement basically, in conjunction with what sidewalk counselors are already doing, the rescue movement its heart was to put themselves between the woman who's going into the abortion clinic and the abortionist, and basically they would, through civil disobedience, block the door. But there's some, I know, listen, of course, if you listen to the media about this and you read some of the stories from back in those days, it was a lot of hyped up, and like these are a bunch of violent people that were just doing, it wasn't civil disobedience in their eyes, it was just violence and just, anger. And it's like, man, when I look back at some of the old videos from the rescues, and I listen to people like you like yourself talk about the rescue movement, it's like, these are just God-loving, people-loving individuals. Yeah. Like it or lump it, they were doing the best they can with what they knew to try to interpose, to try to stand between that mother and that abortionist, and then ultimately working in conjunction with the sidewalk counselor to try to convince her to choose life. And there were, I don't know how many, maybe you guys do, I would say thousands of babies that were saved through that. So if you could share, you've already shared one powerful testimony. Share a testimony, whether it's from, the rescue sort of thing going on with Operation Rescue, or whether it's through sidewalk counseling. Maybe share a story that you guys have experienced. Another one.
Well, Terri was out. A woman had lost her baby at about, Betty, she lost her baby about 14 weeks?
Yes,
is that what it was?
Weeks,
And so the doctor had allowed her to bring her baby home for some reason in a jar, and she felt like, I want my baby Anthony to be useful in some way. I feel like God has something he wants to do with my baby. And so she ended up allowing Terri to bring her baby in the jar out on the sidewalk. And Terri was very careful with it because she got
I know people are going to go, what?
Yeah.
I know.
A little creepy, a little weird, but okay. Right. The Lord uses all kinds of stuff.
It was in a cardboard box, and I only used it if I would ask a girl, oh, you're 12 weeks. Well, I have a little baby that's 14 weeks. Would you want to see the baby?
Yeah.
And if she did, I would show him, Anthony, to her, and they were amazed. And we showed five people the baby, and out of the 4 changed their minds, kept their baby, and 3 ended up asking Jesus into their heart.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was used very effectively, but it wasn't long before the abortion business caught wind of it, and they actually called the coroner out there, and it became a big media thing. That the news said that night that Terri was parading up and down the sidewalk, showing this fetus in the jar to everybody as if she was just waving it around. Yeah, and so they made a big.
Well,
very fake news.
Yeah. To find out if it was viable, even. Okay. It was crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Wow.
Right. So they tried
a little hypocritical of them.
Yes.
Right. But God used that effectively, and it wasn't long after that you met Jackie out on the sidewalk, a young woman who was there with her young granddaughter, and she herself thought that she might be pregnant, and she was watching her granddaughter who was a baby.
But they didn't allow children in
of course,
clinic.
right.
So here I am. I had never met her before, and I don't know if I volunteered or what, but I said, well, I can, because back then they would just do the pregnancy test and they would call them back in a couple of hours to let them know what the results were.
Uh-huh.
And so I watched her grandbaby out there while she went in, and then we exchanged phone numbers. But she had told me, if I'm pregnant, I'm going to have an abortion. I just got in shape. She was going to be a correctional officer. Her youngest was like 5, I guess, and her whole new life was going to start over, And
the father of her baby was married to somebody else and was a deacon
in the church.
Oh, yeah.
And so, it's just like, we can't do this. And
Yeah.
so, anyway, that became a lifelong
Still
relationship. We just yesterday, the day before, you were still talking to her about some things.
But we told her
And
that
so-
we would, I said, we'll adopt your baby.
Uh-huh.
And she was a black lady.
Yeah.
And we were great friends. And she said, you really would? And I said, yeah, sure, And so we kept, and off and on, she'd still think she might need to abort. I got to be at the birth of the baby.
Yeah.
And then once she saw him, she said, sorry, Terry, I'm keeping him. And I said, that's fine.
Yeah.
We never even got to have him for a single night.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. So you went through the sort of up and down. A lot of a lot of sidewalk counselors will know exactly what you're talking about. Like you connect with the mom, she chooses life, and the next day she says, oh, "I just don't think I can do this," and so you're in that prayer sort of tension and like God move on her heart. Don't let her get back. Yeah, we've experienced that several times. It's cool how the Lord can bring those stories about, and even you have a relationship now. This lady's your friend. That's
28 years
awesome.
ago. That happened 28 years ago. So
Wow, that's
And
that's awesome.
he's even saying at some of our dinners and stuff. And
Okay.
when he was younger,
Yeah, that's so awesome.
Thank you for giving.
Thank you for
to the-
giving to the Lord. He sang that song. What was I supposed to be? So it was.
Yeah, that's powerful.
God definitely blessed us by having that relationship over the years.
Yeah. Now you had shared earlier, and I could be misquoting you on this, but you guys were involved, or at least in some way involved in the life chain movement and sort of the beginning stages of that. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, this was during the rescue days when there was a big flash of attention and a lot of things happening for the Holy Week in California. And then after that, a lot of people got arrested, and it's like, oh wow, there was a big price to pay there because they really cracked down on them. They're in L.A. with nunchucks and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of people saying, "Is there something else we can do? We're not sure how long we can keep doing these rescues." And during that time, we heard of this life chain idea that had happened up in Yuba City, Marysville. A man named Royce Dunn had the idea of just holding this sign that says abortion kills children.
Yeah.
At the time, it was just that one sign and no other message. He just felt like that's the message God gave him, abortion kills children.
Yeah.
And so we ended up getting in touch with the guy who was the head of that in Bakersfield, and he had actually been at that same rescue that Terry talked about, where the pro-aborts were surrounding the car with their Keep Abortion Legal sign. They're trying to keep her from being able to talk to this girl. He was videotaping that. Terry called him.
Because we were thinking maybe we should have a rescue in Bakersfield.
Right, because he was the head of Operation Rescue in Bakersfield, even though we hadn't had any rescues in Bakersfield. And so we called him to see what we could do with that. And he said, wait, who are you? And he realized at that very moment he had been editing a video. He had a video of that rescue, of that very moment. When she called, he was looking at a video of her trying to save that baby's life. So we got a picture from him later of her interceding for that baby with this car all surrounded with these Keep Abortion Legal signs.
And we didn't know him before then.
Yeah.
And so we were there with him throughout the time he was planning this Bakersfield life chain, which was the first one after the one Royce did in Yuba City, Marysville. And this Bakersfield life chain, he mapped out this huge area, miles of sidewalks, and had a church designated for each block. and just a huge plan that he went to do all this. His name was Bill Newsom, the man I'm referring to, and ended up having 8,000 people on the sidewalks on the streets of Bakersfield during that time. And
they formed a cross.
It was a huge, miles-long cross, and Bill had the foresight to know this is something we need to have people know more about what we did here. So he hired videographers to take videos, and he had a helicopter taking an aerial view of the whole thing. And so that video that he took in Bakersfield of that first Bakersfield life chain ended up being spread all across the country. The life chain is still to this day promoting that Bakersfield video as the thing that got so many people across the country to realize we need to be getting out to the streets and standing for this message. And it was primarily through the churches. It was primarily with Bill Newsom. It was primarily something that he said, we got to get to the pastors individually. Yeah. And it wasn't just, we need to go there and tell the pastor, hey, you got to follow our agenda or you're worthless. It was, we want to support you in this, pastor. We're here we're here to pray for you. We are here, understanding that you need help in what we're doing. And you go there not saying, hey, pastor, we want you to solve this huge problem yourself, but here's something tangible that you can do. Here's something, we're laying out a program here for you to follow, and all we need to know is that as a pastor, this is going to have your spiritual leadership in your congregation. Yeah,
it's cool how the Lord can just grow things like that. We have locally, I shared with you guys, and you've probably seen some on social media, Love Life Charlotte's a ministry that's done something similar to that, just bringing the people out to the abortion clinics to pray. And they've been a great partner with us. Even some of the folks who have come out to the prayer walks have taken it a step further, and probably you guys experienced that same thing, that I came and I held a sign, but I want to do something else, and they come sidewalk counsel and get involved in that way. So it's really cool to see the Lord doing that. Talk a little bit about, because starting out, I said, and you agree, abortion is not a political issue, but there are some political decisions that are made, and there are some things that we as believers can do in order to influence the politics. I mean, how it should take place is the politics follow the church as the church leads, because we're supposed to be the conscience of society. So unfortunately, we've not been that in a lot of ways, but there are some ways that we have been, and I know you're involved with some of the political stuff, and in particular the Life Amendment.
Right.
Talk about that. Talk about the way the church can get on board with that, and why that's sort of an important thing for us to understand.
Well, one of the most important scriptures, I think, of the rescue movement that was talked about frequently was, I believe it's Matthew 16, where Jesus says to Peter, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. And to understand what that meant, that the church was confronting the gates of hell. Yeah. That we are going after the gates of hell. But as in the last few years, as I've studied that, I've come to a new understanding as I realize the word church is actually not really a good representation of what Jesus said in that scripture to Peter. The word in Greek is ekklesia, and the word ekklesia, or assembly, is something that has a rich background in both the Old Testament and in the Greek culture. Of course, that was written in Greek. Yeah. And the Greek ekklesia that was hundreds of years before Christ was the assembly, the political assembly of men of the community who came together to decide key issues in the community. In the community, these were city-states of classical Greek. The communities were the polis, and that's where the word politics comes out of, that community where the ecclesia was there deciding these issues. And so when we say the gates of hell will not prevail against the ecclesia, understanding the assembly, there was a political connotation to that in its original meaning. And so, when Jesus calls us to occupy until he comes, and, even though we are not citizens of this world, that we are citizens of heaven, We are to be faithful in the tasks that he has given us here.
Yeah.
As citizens of our nation, we have all authority is given to us by God. And so we have the authority that God has given to us as citizens of our nation to be involved in the political process, to be involved in not just voting, but in political efforts to raise awareness about things. And so I think it's part of our calling to be salt and light in the society that we need to be reaching for efforts to protect people of all kinds.
Yeah.
And abortion is not a political issue, it's a people issue.
Okay.
And just like a lot of things that politicians deal with affect people, and a lot of things churches deal with affect people.
Yeah.
And so abortion is one of those things. It's affecting real people. That child in its mother's womb, 97% of biologists, a recent study recently came out saying that 97% of biologists agree that human life begins at the point of fertilization, conception, when the sperm and egg meet.
Yeah.
And so this is something that, those who advocate taking away the lives of these children in the womb are really science deniers. Those who say that's not a baby, that's not a human being. These are the worst kind of science deniers, where it's really basic genetics to know this baby in the womb is a human being.
Yeah.
And so the Life Amendment is an effort to simply say, and it's a very short thing that simply say that a human being is considered legally a person from the earliest point of its development.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't go into a lot of detail about abortion or anything like that, because if you use that word person, it links in with the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, especially the 14th, that talks about the protections of you can't deny a person of life or liberty without due process.
Yeah.
And so the due process, this isn't, it's not in any way taking away from the personhood of a woman. Women as well deserve due process, but the baby deserves due process before its life is taken away. And so the Life Amendment is an effort constitutionally in our federal Constitution to have what you've probably heard the personhood movement across the country quite a bit. It's a federal personhood effort, but the difference is that a federal constitutional amendment is something the Supreme Court can't strike it down. They can't tinker with it. It's a constitutional amendment. It actually sets the rules that the Supreme Court itself has to live by.
Yeah.
So they have to adhere to that as part of the Constitution, because they're required to uphold.
So what is the language exactly in what you guys have proposed in the Life Amendment?
Well, I don't have the exact language memorized, but basically it's that from the beginning of the development of a human being, it would be considered a person.
Okay.
It's a very, very, very.
So basically, it's just an invitation for everyone to catch up with reality that this is a person, and for the government to catch up with that reality and say basically all of the constitutional protections that are in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution apply even to a person in the womb, right? Okay, that's cool.
And the website, lifeamendment.org.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was a particular website someone could go to and check it out.
The specific wording on there, lifeamendment.org. But the real person whose passion brought this about, this Life Amendment website, is a man that many people probably are familiar with, Dr. Don Smith. He was the producer of the Silent Scream video many years ago.
Yeah, I remember that video.
And
it's been a while since I watched it, but it's powerful.
Yeah.
He passed away in January at about 95 years old. I think he was little short of his 95th birthday, but God used him for many years. But in the last few years, we had the opportunity of working with him on this Life Amendment effort, and the way this whole Life Amendment was constructed, and most of the things on our website and our pamphlets we hand out, those were all written by him in his final years.
Yeah.
So it's talk about a pro-life pioneer. It's just been amazing to have the opportunity in the last few years as he was in his rest home. We talked to him frequently there. This was his passion until his final days.
Yeah. It's I know for sure. For me personally, I'm around Flip Benham, you guys know him on a regular basis, and been exposed to other people that have been in pro-life ministry for a long time, and I've been able to just glean a lot of wisdom, and just talking to you guys and just this little bit of time that we've known each other, been able to draw out some wisdom for sure. And just the last couple of minutes, because I'm going to wrap this thing up, if that's all right with you guys, share, if you could, some wisdom, maybe some things that, for those who are kind of brand new in dealing with the issue of abortion, maybe a lot of folks that listen to our podcast are involved in sidewalk counseling and maybe just newly involved in it. And maybe some other people, for whatever reason, listen to this podcast. What are some of maybe some of the warnings or just some nuggets of wisdom that you would speak to somebody just brand new getting into this battle for the unborn?
Well, in terms of dealing with people directly who are going in for abortion, that's been the major focus of our ministry over the years. So we've done a lot of different things, including life amendment, things like that. But one of the best pieces of wisdom I got was about probably 15 years ago when Franklin Graham was coming to Bakersfield for one of his festivals. And we've had an opportunity to see Franklin Graham many times over the years and really appreciate his boldness in speaking out of abortion. In this particular situation, he didn't talk about abortion at all. I don't recall him speaking of abortion specifically at that time. But we were going to be a part of the effort in terms of just counseling people at the end, and there's a training class they have you go through. And part of that, I'm assuming, has been part of the Billy Graham training probably for years before Franklin himself was the evangelist there. But part of that was just really key to me when it talked about when you're trying to reach somebody, you need to address their significance and their security.
Okay.
Those two key things I think are so important as we're dealing with people on this issue. Significance, both to the mother and to the baby, to understand, Mom, you are significant in the eyes of God. You matter to God. And your baby matters too.
Yeah.
And the security is to say to the mother, we're here to help you. God isn't, you're not alone here. There are people that are going to help you through this.
Yeah.
And so we need to consider the significance and security of women as we're dealing with them. And that same training went on to talk about things that are roadblocks to relationships, and talked about, there's, I think, 5 Ds it goes through. I don't know if I can remember them all, but demeaning, demanding, dogmatic, all these things that, if you're kind of saying you got to do it my way to this woman and kind of trying to push her into your mold, instead of saying, there's a God here who is wanting to help you through this. If we're trying to push them with our human ability instead of letting God use us in this situation, then things don't turn out so well and they put up roadblocks against us. But I just really found that training from the Graham organization to be just a nugget of wisdom that every pro-lifer should consider.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's sort of along the lines, because we do trainings as a ministry for sidewalk counseling, and we have 3 points that we encourage sidewalk counselors to touch on. We say, talk about what God says. What God says about abortion, of course, but what God says about the mother and the baby, that he loves them, that he cares about them. So that sort of speaks to that whole, seeing their values, the significance that they have. And then we say, talk about the humanity of the baby. Your baby's heart's already beating. Your baby has 10 fingers, 10 toes, and all of that. So give humanity to the baby. And the third point that we tell people is resources. Talk about the things that are available. The mobile ultrasound unit that's right there, pregnancy centers, prenatal care, all these other things. It's sort of right along the lines of what you're saying. And it's not rocket science. It's pretty simple things. If we look at it from our perspective, being in difficult situations, what are the things that speaks to us? What are the things that helps calm the storm? And it's exactly like you said.
Right. It just makes me think of, it's a Flip Benham phrase, but it just makes me think of letting our theology become biography. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap this thing up. I do appreciate you guys coming and sharing your heart, sharing your experiences. I know that it'll have an effect. It certainly had an effect on me, and I know it'll have an effect on others. I want to encourage those who are listening with check out these guys' website as far as the Life Amendment. You said lifeamendment.org. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And do you guys have a website locally for your ministry and what you guys are involved in? What's that website?
glorifyjesus.com.
I like that. That's really good. glorifyjesus.com. That's what this is about. So you can check those guys out. I'll put that in the description in the podcast itself so people can go to those websites. Also, we have a website as a ministry that we always mention, and that's www.sidewalksforlife.com, sidewalks the number 4, life.com, which is a gospel-centered sidewalk counseling website with training videos, and we put out blog posts on a regular basis talking about how to be effective in certain areas and that sort of thing. You can connect with me also at dparks at citiesforlife.com, and our website, charlotte.citiesforlife.org. Again, appreciate you guys coming. Appreciate all those who listen. And until next time, God bless.
Use me, Lord, oh,